appreciate the fact that I was not able to be here last Wednesday, and so I'm glad that Brother Wyndham agreed to teach my class for me. I appreciate that very, very much. I know that can be hard on you when you don't have a whole lot of time to prepare. I got to hear about the first 30 minutes or so of it before my computer stopped working. But what I heard was really good. I appreciate that very, very much. We're in the book of Exodus chapter 2, and really we'll be down about verse 11. This is a time that Moses has gone out to look upon his brethren. We talked a little bit about that evidently he had been taught by his mother to know that he was a Hebrew, and so he went out to see how his brethren, the Hebrews that were enslaved, how they were faring. And so as he goes out there, first thing I want to notice tonight is he sees an Egyptian beating one of the Hebrew slaves. That's interesting here in looking at that. Brother Clyde Woods, who one of the professors I had at Freed Hardeman, he got his doctorate degree from Hebrew Union. So, that's what he had specialized in. But anyhow, he was talking about that evidently this Egyptian probably was head of a crew of men that he was responsible for to keep them working. And he is the one that was beating this Hebrew slave. And Brother Wood suggests that the idea was he was beating him to death with at least the view of killing this man. And that when Moses saw that, Moses intervened on that occasion. And what did Moses do? What? Yeah, he killed the Egyptian. You think about what he's done here. When he first gets there, when you read the text of it there, it says, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian. Why would he be looking this way and that? Yeah, I want to make sure there were no witnesses to see. Now, what does that tell you about Moses' feelings here about what he was fixing to do? Yeah, he knew it wasn't right. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that suggests, he was checking if there's anybody that's a witness to what I'm fixing to do. And if there had been, maybe he would not have done what he did. We don't know for sure, but that's, it seems to be some indication why he's looking to see if there's anybody watching. But since there is no one there, he takes action against the Egyptian and he kills the man. And then what does he do? He buried him in the sand. Now, why did he do that? Was it because, being a good Hebrew person, he wanted to see everybody get a proper burial? Is that what he was doing? No. What's he trying to do? Hiding. He's covering up what he's done. He doesn't want anybody to know what he's done. And there's a good reason why. The indication that if somebody had been watching, he wouldn't have done that. But since there's nobody watching, he will do it. He's willing to do it. He just doesn't want anybody to know what he has done. But it was kind of intriguing to me. Brother Roper, in his commentary on Exodus, made the statement in regard to this. He said that this was an act of premeditated murder. Premeditated maybe from the time that he begins looking. I don't think when he went out there to check on his brethren, he had it in mind he's going to have to kill somebody. But, you stop to think about that, about it. Did God approve of Moses killing this Egyptian? You wouldn't think so. Evidently, Brother Roper didn't think so. The law that God has given, God forbids murder. In fact, the better translations, that's the way it's rendered there in the Ten Commandments, commandment number 6. The old King James Version says, thou shalt not kill. But the newer translations say, thou shalt not commit murder. And so that's really what's being talked about here. Is there ever a time when killing would be proper? What's that? Self-defense is considered one. Steve?
God commanded his army to annihilate people.
Right.
So we don't know that it wasn't God's will that Moses rise up and kill this Egyptian.
Yeah, and I kind of lean toward.
Using one of God's chosen people.
'Cause to me, that's kind of, that comes in the realm of self-defense. He's not defending himself, of course. He's defending a fellow Jew who's being beaten, and evidently the suggestion in the language is being beaten with the idea of beating him to death. And so he's trying to prevent that, and to do that, he takes the life of this Egyptian. So there are times when God has commanded his armies to kill women and children. There are times when self-defense is all right. Plus also, we learn specifically, in the New Testament, that God has ordained governments, that they have a right to execute people, to put people to death if they're guilty of certain crimes. And so, murder is wrong, but I don't know that I could define what he's done here as murder. I think he's trying to defend somebody who's being threatened with murder. But if that's the case, why is he so fearful of anybody knowing about it? Because he killed an Egyptian. Now, if that Egyptian killed the Roman or the Jewish slave, nobody in power is going to get upset about that. Pharaoh's not going to be angry about that. But if a Hebrew kills an Egyptian, that's a different story. And though Moses has been raised in Pharaoh's house by Pharaoh's daughter, he is still a Jew. He's a Hebrew, and he's killed an Egyptian. And so that makes a difference here. And that's why, Moses tries to hide what he's done. Buries the body of this man in the sand. Of course, there are going to be some people that know about it. Who's going to know about it? Right. There are people there. We know at least one person that's there as a witness. The man he's defending would have been a witness to see what Moses has done. And likely, there wouldn't have just been one slave out there working with one Egyptian man out there responsible for watching him work. In all likelihood, there are a number of slaves there. And really that becomes evident, a little bit later here in regard to this. Moses becomes aware that other people know what he's done. How did he know that? Well, first of all, Jack. Yeah, he wanted to make sure. Right, because they're there. He doesn't care about that. But Moses becomes aware later that other people know what he's done. It comes about the very next day when Moses goes out, and what did he see? He saw two Hebrews fighting. One Hebrew is beating another one. And Moses goes in to intercede there. And the text says, when he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man that did the wrong, why do you strike your fellow? And it's almost as if Moses said, look, you have it bad enough as slaves. You've got the Egyptians beating you and forcing you into this labor. Why do you want to beat one another? Why should you be involved in doing that? So why are you beating your fellow Hebrew? And what did that slave say to him? Yeah, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? Uh-oh. Moses knows. Other people are aware of it. Whether or not that man was a witness to it the day before, or whether he's just heard those who were present talk about it. And, and that could happen. It's hard to keep a secret. And I could just imagine that man who was defended by Moses when he was being beaten by an Egyptian, I can just imagine he probably told others of the Jews, this man who's raised up in Pharaoh's household defended me, and he killed an Egyptian that was beating me, And so you'd want to tell people about that and how you've been saved, in effect, by this man. But as soon as Moses hears that, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? He knows it's out. And there's no telling how many people know now about Moses and what he has done on that occasion and what he did. And so becoming aware of that fact, he learns later, or at least we learn here, we're told that Pharaoh did learn about what he had done. Then Moses was afraid, latter part there, verse 14, was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard it, he sought to kill Moses. So eventually it did get to Pharaoh. I guess, probably when time came for having accounting among those Egyptians that are responsible for the slave, for watching after them and seeing that they're doing the work, and he doesn't report back, well, where is he? And he finds out eventually that the Egyptian has been killed, and he's been killed by Moses. And so Pharaoh wants to kill Moses. Now, hey, it's one thing if you're beating a slave and killing him, Pharaoh probably could care less about that. But you've killed an Egyptian. And even though you've been raised up by my daughter in my house, you're not going to be allowed to kill an Egyptian and get by with it. So he seeks for Moses. His desire is to put Moses to death. And so Moses flees to Midian. Now, put that up on the map here. Can't hardly see. I've got it circled here in red. But the Midianites, they were not a settled people. They moved about a good bit. And though this is listed here as a place where they live, most people believe that, that they weren't limited to this area. They moved about, and there's belief that they're now on this side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And the reason why is because we're going to see later with Moses, when he takes the sheep out to feed them, he takes them back over to around Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. And so, if they were living at that time there, if they were living at that time here, where it shows Midian, that is a long way to drive sheep around there to come here near to the presence of Mount Sinai and then to go back home. So probably they have moved over on the other side. So he's there now living in Midian. Now, I want you to, if you would, turn to the book of Acts for just a moment. Acts chapter 7. We keep going back at this at times, looking at it, to see what Stephen says about Moses and about this time. We noticed that he said that Moses was about 40 years of age when he fled to Midian. And so I want us to notice here what he has to say about Moses and why Moses did what he did in killing the Egyptian. Someone read verse 25 for us. Rusty, do you have that? You could read it.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them. They did not.
Right. Now, why would Moses think that? Why would he think, hey, the Jews have got to know that God has chosen me to deliver them? And what would make Moses think that? All right, his mother, telling about it and training him. And I've often wondered, what kind of access they may have had to any of the the teachings in regard to God and the promises that God had made to Abraham, because that's going to be important. So he supposes that his brethren would have understood. And maybe one reason why, too, is because, number one, Moses is a Hebrew. And maybe they know that because Moses' mother, that she's told the other Hebrews about that that's her son. And being a Hebrew, but he's not a Hebrew that's a slave. He's living in Pharaoh's house. He's a man in a position that you would think would be a position of power and authority. So, hey, maybe even could be in line to become the next Pharaoh. And we don't know that, but, that's a possibility. And so Moses is thinking, look, if you're a slave, you can't necessarily expect, hey, old Pharaoh's going to change his mind. He's going to set us free. No, he's not going to do that. The only ones concerned about us are us, the Jews. But Moses is a Jew, and he's in a position of authority. So maybe Moses thinks they ought to know that if anybody's going to be the one to deliver them, that it would be me. But they don't see that. And to me, that's just another one of the many, many points that you see about Moses that's so similar to Christ. Moses is regarded as a type of Christ. And you'll read more about that when you get into the book of Deuteronomy. But there are things that we talked about before all along here in the book of Exodus that would indicate he's a type of Christ. So here it is. Moses thinks, man, these Jews ought to know I'm the one that God has chosen to deliver them. But they didn't. When Jesus came, according to John chapter 1, he came to his own, and his own what? Received him not. God had given Jesus to them to be their deliverer. But the Jews didn't see it that way. And they didn't accept him as God's deliverer. They rejected him for the most part. And that's exactly what has happened here with Moses. They have rejected him. In Genesis chapter 15, if you want to turn to that, or at least write this down in your notes about it, Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14. This is in regard to the promises that God made to Abraham. And I don't know what these Hebrews in slavery would know about that, if they would know anything, and maybe that Moses may have been taught that by his mother. But Genesis 15, 13, and 14 says, God says, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. And so if Moses knew anything at all about that, then, hey, 400 years enslaved, and then God's going to raise up somebody, and God's going to deliver them. And Moses would know, I'm sure, how long the Jews have been enslaved in Egypt. And so maybe begin to think, hey, it's about that time. This is the time that God says he's going to do it. And who's in a better position for God to use than me? And he is the one that God has chosen to deliver them. But not at that time. God has other things in mind for Moses. I believe things that are designed primarily to help prepare Moses for the task he's going to have at hand at delivering the Hebrew people here. So Moses has fled to Midian. Talk about there in Midian, chapter 2, verses 16 to 22. We'll look at these few verses here. It says, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them, and watered their flock. When they came to rule their father, he said, how is it that you have come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. So he said to his daughters, and where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? call him that he may eat bread. Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. And she bore him a son, and he called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. Moses flees to Midian. When he gets to Midian, he sits by a well. And I've wondered, just out of curiosity, if Moses had any ideas or any type of plan for what he was going to do. He's come to what would be a strange land to him. The first 40 years of his life have been spent in Egypt. And so he's not familiar with this place and with the people. And so he's sitting by the well. But then the daughters of Reuel come to water the flocks. And when the other shepherds there won't let them water, they're going to take the water that's already been poured out on the trough and use it to feed or water their flock. And Moses then intervenes on behalf of these 7 women, and he makes it possible for them to feed or to water their flock first. He provides that for them in doing that. So the first act that we read about Moses when he gets to the land of Midian is defending the 7 daughters of Reuel. Reuel, the priest of Midian. They came to water their father's flocks, and evidently from the way it's worded here, they had already drawn the water themselves and had it out in the troughs for their flocks to feed until these shepherds came and evidently said, no. That water, we're going to use that to water our flocks. And so they do that. After the women have done the work evidently of drawing the water, then they come in and take it to water their flocks. Except Moses is there, and he intervenes to defend these women. And he makes sure, and the text doesn't go into what all happened, but evidently, he stood up against those men, and whether he had to use violence with them like he had done with the Egyptian, we don't know, but he lets them know, I believe, you're not going to take that water for your sheep. These women have drawn it for their flock, and their flock's going to have that first. And so that's what he does for them. Somebody pointed out that this was the 3rd time in this chapter, in chapter 2, that we have seen Moses standing up on behalf of those who are being oppressed. The first of those, and I think I've just mentioned these things here about it. All right. The compassion for the poor that he has for them. The first of these, for his fellow Jews that's being beaten by an Egyptian. He stood up to defend him, killing the Egyptian. Then he stood up for the Jew who was being oppressed by his fellow Jew. And now he stands up for the 7 daughters of Reuel who are being oppressed by the shepherds. Somebody said that the one thing that really aggravated Moses was seeing anybody being oppressed. And so 3 different times he stands up to defend these people and to intercede on their behalf to see that they're not going to be mistreated and that what's right is going to be done. Brother Roper suggested that it was this compassion that Moses had for people. Excuse me, I thought I put that up there. His compassion for people. Maybe that was what God saw in him that said, this is the man to be the one to lead my people out of slavery. That he'll have compassion on them. He's already shown that to one extent, and have that compassion upon them to lead them out. So he's standing up for all of these people. Now, when the daughters come back, the first thing that Reuel wants to know is, how did you manage to get home so quickly? Why would he think they'd gotten back so quickly? This has happened before. Probably on other occasions when they've come to water their flocks, maybe these other shepherds just waited and let them draw the water, and then they'd go in there and take it with their own flock. And so they'd have to wait till the flocks of these other people have been watered, and then they could water their own flock. And so they got back early this time And so Daddy wants to know, how come is that? How'd you manage to do that? And so they tell him that there was an Egyptian who was there, and he stood up for us against those other shepherds and allowed our flocks to be watered first. Yes, sir. Probably from his dress. But that's all they know about him. That's all they said about him here. They just said an Egyptian. And that's the only thing I can think of is his dress. Maybe his language. Whether he spoke to them in Hebrew or in the Egyptian language that he would certainly have known. But that's all they knew about him. That's what they tell the daddy. Now, the daddy responds to that with 2 questions and a command. Question number 1, what did he say to them there? First, yeah, where is he? Well, what do you mean, where is he? I guess he's back there at the well. What do you mean, where is he? One of the things that was highly prized in the ancient Near East was hospitality. And especially when someone has befriended you and done a favor for you. And this man, maybe he's shocked at his daughter's actions. Hey, you say this man stood up for you and allowed our flocks to be watered instead of the others? Then where is he? And he wants to know. Second question, not just where is he, but then he wants to know, why did you not bring him? You know, what is this? You've done that. Why have you left the man? You should have brought him home. You know, because of the kindness, we need to show kindness in return to him. Bring him home. Then he gives the command. He tells them, go get the man that he may come and look. And do what? What? To eat bread. Come and have a meal with us. And so, you know, I imagine, I don't know if all 7 of them went or just one went back to find Moses and bring him home to have a meal with him. But, you know, ended up Moses got a pretty good bargain out of it. He got more than just a meal, didn't he? Number 1, he got him a home. When he left Egypt, I don't think he had any idea of what he's going to do when he gets over to a strange land. Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? Well, this man Reuel gives him a home, a place to stay, and gives him a job to do. He's going to work for him. And so he'll be there with a home. Secondly, he gives him the job. He's going to become the shepherd to look after the flock that Reuel has. He's already shown his abilities to stand up to those, to take those sheep out to water, to see to it that they're going to be taken care of, to do that. But then, he not only gave him a home and gave him a job, he gave him a wife. I don't know about y'all, but it was a little bit harder than that for me. But he's given a wife. And then, in time, he gets a son. And so, things are working out really, really well for Moses. You think about that, you know, hey, he's lost his home where he lived in the home of Pharaoh. He had all that to provide for him and so much that he had. But now he goes to a new land. What's it going to be like? Well, he's blessed. Reuel is the man whose daughters have been helped by Moses. And who is Reuel? By the way, do you know what the name means? Do you have a footnote maybe in your Bible that gives you the meaning of his name? The name means friend of God. Now, if you look at the end of that EL, you know, that's the beginning of the a name is translated as God, Elohim. And you see that name a lot in the names that people have. And it has a reference to God. Now, it could reference sometimes pagan gods. So this man, his name is Ruel, friend of God. Abraham is known in the Bible as the friend of God. But Abraham's name doesn't mean friend of God. He's called that because of his actions, his living for God, serving God. So this man is there. He's the one that's there. Ruel was a priest of Midian. Now, later on, we see that he is going to serve Jehovah God. But at this time, Dr. Wood says we can't say absolutely that he was a priest of the God worshipped by the Jews. He could have been, but it's hard to know because the Midianite people, though they are descendants from Abraham by his wife Keturah, they weren't all worshipers of the true God. This man, he's called the priest of Midian. We talked about his response, in getting Moses there, and what Moses received. He gets a home, he gets a wife, and he gets a son, and he names his son Gershom. Now, what does that mean? Look at your text there, and talks about it. He called his name Gershom. That's in verse 22. For he said what? Yeah, a sojourner in a foreign land, a stranger in a foreign land. Now that could be understood in two ways. He could have said, I'm a stranger in a foreign land. Right here in the land of Midian, I'm a stranger here. It's a foreign land to me. Or it could have been referencing back to being there in Egypt, because Egypt was not his home. He was a Jew, a Hebrew, and they did not live in Egypt. They'd gone down there in a time of famine, and they'd been made slaves there. So he could have been a stranger in a strange land there in Egypt. But either way, he names his son Gershom to emphasize that very fact, that he is a stranger in a strange land. Now, the next thing that we talk about here, we just got a little bit of time left. The Israelites begin to cry out to God. Now, I think there must be a reason why they begin to cry out to God at this time. So, as we look at these next few verses here, verses 23 through 25, it says, Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So in the process of time, we don't know how long this was, Moses is going to spend 40 years in the land of Midian. 1/3 of his life. His life's divided up into periods of 40 years. 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian, then 40 years in leading the children out of Egypt through the wilderness until they get finally to the promised land. So 40 years here in Midian. And sometime during that stay, we're not told how long he's been there, that the king of Egypt died. Well, what king are they talking about? Yeah, they're talking about Pharaoh. Do what? He's the one that was seeking to kill Moses. He's the one that Moses had grown up there in Pharaoh's house. But when he killed an Egyptian, and Pharaoh's determined now he's going to kill Moses, and Moses flees. But now that king has died. So maybe these Jews who are in slavery there, maybe they're beginning to think, look, this man who has held us in bondage has died. Maybe with the transition, there was one king that had been favorable to the Jews. But when he died, a king arose that knew not Joseph, and their life changed drastically. It went from being a people that were honored and were preferred to a people that became slaves. So maybe they've got their hopes up. Hey, with this king dying, maybe now things will be changed. I don't know if they would expected maybe to be set free, but at least the cruelty with which we're being treated, maybe that would change. But evidently it didn't, because the text says there that the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. It continued, and maybe they're beginning to realize, what's been true for the generations before of our people here in Egypt is now going to be true for us too. We're going to spend the rest of our lives as slaves, laboring here in service to the Egyptians, being abused and beaten by them under the hard labor that they put us to. And so they're crying out. And nobody hears their cry except God. And that's the one that really counts. And so we're going to have to end here. Our time's gone. But be thinking about these verses next week and some of the things that are said here. For example, in verse 24, it says, God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. Does that mean that God had forgotten the promise that he had made to them and what was to be done? So we think about that. We'll begin with these few verses next week, Lord willing. So let's close out with a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, again, we thank thee and praise thee for the great love you have for us, for the love you've always had for mankind and especially for your people, and for the opportunities you've always given, Father, for people, even those who are living in rebellion to you, to correct their lives and come into a right relationship with you, and to do so with the full assurance that when that is done, they will become the recipients of your blessings and the hope that you give to us all. Bless us now, Father, as your children, and keep us safe and in your care this week, and bless us that we'll be able to be back again this Sunday, and that we will glorify and honor thee in our worship. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.